She is a fantastic attorney who fights like crazy. I mean, I've been in the courtroom watching her fight, and she doesn't let those judges get away with anything.
But they do anyway.
Yeah, but she yells at them, and I mean, it's funny, they're afraid of her.
Bring in free bailiff.
Yeah. They go, uh-oh, here she comes. And so she's one of the rare attorneys that really does fight for protective mothers. She fights really hard. And she is also famous for having fought and won the first sexual harassment case in the United States Supreme Court in the 80s. We don't want to date you, but 1980 what?
1986.
1986. So she knows what she's doing, and I think it's good. We didn't talk much about this, but it can come into play now that what we are talking about with ending this male entitlement and the discrimination against women is that what we have here is almost by definition a civil rights movement. We are fighting for our civil rights and our human right to our children. And so it's apropos that we have Pat Berry on our board as Director of Legal Affairs, and that she is a civil rights attorney and specialist as well as a family court attorney. So welcome, Pat. You want to come up and...
First, I want to ask everyone in this courtroom who had a wonderful success in family law court. If you were there, raise your hand. So I'm speaking to my constituents, I suspect. This is the best of times and the worst of times. There's, of course, the rise of the feminist movement that got its impetus during the time when I was in my 20s with the civil rights movement, and women picked up on it and thought in the 70s that we were going to bring about this huge change. And instead, it's fallen into horrible, horrible, ugly, misogynistic reaction. And I think the place where the system knows they can get women the very best is as a mother. Whether it's reproductive rights, the right to choose to have a child or not, whether the right to raise that child in a safe and secure environment, whether it is to have equal pay for equal work so that you can pay for the proper child care if you choose to work outside the home, and so on. And the family courts, or I'd like to say, as far as I'm concerned, Trump has nothing on the family courts. Women are routinely insulted. They are degraded. They suffer unbelievable financial abuse. And in the cases that I've done and continue to do, I don't know one woman who alleged domestic violence or alleged child abuse, particularly child sexual abuse, as in the case of Cindy Dumas, that ever was left standing with her finances secure, and most of all, had retained custody of the child or children she alleged was being abused. It is a terrible, terrible epidemic. And I just came away yesterday in Orange Superior Court, and I'm going to name out the judge. We've got to start putting these judges in the Hall of Shame. Her name is Judge Horner. And Kirsten Cook was deprived of all custody and access to her children for no reason whatsoever. The father abused the child. He had a mental disorder since he was 2 years old, brilliant. He was sent to a residential school in 2012 from age 15 to 16. Ethan was doing great away from his abusive father, was forced back to his father because Orange County CPS, Laguna Beach Police Department, Steve Dragna, his minors counselor, did nothing to protect him. He ended up dead in his father's bathroom when he was 18 years and 8 months. We now have a wrongful death action. And we believe we can prove that the father had something to do with his death. They claim a suicide, and there was no investigation because Laguna Beach Police Department covered up and did not do a proper investigation of the boy's death. And just in contact with a detective who was willing to analyze the records. He said there's all kinds of missing documents that I think if we can get in front of the jury would raise a preponderance of the evidence that the father had everything to do with it. And had the mother been able to regain custody, had they opened up a 300 petition at juvenile court, offered reunification services to mother and son, we believe Ethan would be alive today. That's how bad it is. So what happened was, and I'll just be very brief because I'd like to have questions rather than listen to my own voice. I'd love to hear from you. But just very briefly, my client did have money to serve the federal civil rights action I brought on Ethan's behalf and her behalf, the estate of Ethan Cook and then Kirsten Cook. So she has a friend who's doing a lot of paralegal work and was willing to do the service, but she doesn't live in Orange County. So my client was going around with her to do the service of our federal litigation, and we had to serve Alan Cook, the father. And I had told Judge Carney in a declaration that I needed more extension of time because we thought that Mr. Cook and the minors' counsel, Stephen Dragna, would try to duck service. And Stephen Dragna did. So what happened was she knew better to stay away from him because we have a huge domestic violence stalking case against him for damages within the civil rights case. She didn't want to be around him, but what happened is she saw, and the process server saw him, saw a chance to serve him, parked the car temporarily, ran up and served him. He looked over, couldn't see anybody in the car, came down, saw it was her. She got scared, rolled up the windows, and they bailed. Then Ann later learned she needed another document to serve on him. So they came back, but she said, let's park, wait for a good distance up the hill so he won't know that you're around or anything like that. What he did is he went up the hill after he got served with the paper, following Ann, and harassed my client for 5 minutes. He bought a petition for domestic violence, alleging that my client has filed all these actions against him. I filed what is known in California as the anti-SLAPP motion. It's a slam dunk. If you sue me for petitioning activity or free speech activity, it's an automatic win. Judge Horner refused to grant the anti-SLAPP and forced us to sit in the courtroom while he goes on and blathers along about the harassment he's experienced. When he has harassed this woman, he has laundered, as far as the research we show, $700,000. He was a banker with one of the most corrupt banks in the country, Wells Fargo, that brought about the huge mess that we were in 2007, 2008. Yet we have to sit through, and we're concerned that you'll probably issue a restraining order. So we're, of course, bringing an appeal of the anti-SLAPP, and I'm hoping I can involve DV Leap, because I sent a text to my client before the hearing, and I said, does Judge Horner really want to be on the wrong side of history, where I can make history myself in terms of advancing feminist jurisprudence? Because this is very important. This is what men do. They harass women who assert their rights for filing domestic violence actions and other actions against these abusive men. And this Judge Horner is allowing this man to waste the time in the court. We were there until 4:30 while he's gone, oh, she's just picking on me, and she sent this email, and she, like you're ready to strangle him. And she's allowing this nonsense evidence in, when all he did was, the only thing he could talk about is she showed up at the house. And I said, she showed up at the house because she doesn't have any money to hire professional process servers, and it was inadvertent. She had no intention. And the judge didn't care. Now that's the state of the state. And the problem is that I provided her our First Amendment complaint, in which we're suing what I call the big 3 C's, court, county, and California, as recipients of federal funding. And I said, they're getting all this federal funding for children like Ethan, who was a disabled child who suffered terrible abuse. They misused that money and instead handed custody to the abuser and let this child down, in part because of the misogyny against the mother, by cutting her off all access to that boy, even though he clearly wanted a relationship with that mother, while this man who dares to call himself a father put the kid on the streets, was chronically alcoholic, would wake him up in the middle of the night screaming at him, and at times hit him. And a mother gave a declaration. She had taken Ethan in just before he died, took his life or was killed, and described all the abuse. And the boy told the mother, or told the mother of his girlfriend that who had taken him in, that he believed that he was being abused as opposed to his brother and sister because he reminded his father of his mother. And that's what mothers are facing. It is tragic. This is a grieving mother, and she has to sit in court and listen to this man blather on while his court helps him out, when all he did was complain about her petitioning activity. So that's essentially where we're at. I could go on about my other cases, but we all have nightmares here. And on that note, which is so cheerful, right? If you want to ask any questions about, the rest of what I'm doing in my law practice and where we're going, but I will add this, that in my federal civil rights litigation, my theme is federal funding, and that these people have to be denied the federal funding because it's turned into a perversion. Money used for abused children is being used to abuse them. Money for victims of domestic violence are being used to abuse victims of domestic violence. And they have the kinds of people who are primitive. They don't have training. They don't require training. And they could care less. And it's all about manipulation and taking children and handing them over to their abusers in these kinds of cases. So on that note, if anybody has any questions, Helen?
I'd just like to state that this is United States Department of Justice statistics. The #1 cause of death in pregnant women is homicide. The males that impregnate kill them. The #1 cause of death in pregnant women, United States Department of Justice. #2 cause of death in women is domestic violence, homicide. Their male partners kill them.
Right.
Yet in the nation's divorce courts, there is no acknowledgement of abuse.
Exactly.
It is parental alienation.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what's going on. Kathy?
Can you describe a little bit more about the federal lawsuit that you're doing against the funding? I mean, there's funding going into the courts, and you're suing you said the court and the state or whatever, saying they shouldn't be getting federal funding because they're discriminating against women. I'm not sure what is.
Right. What I call them the big 3 C's: California, courts, and county. Courts are really a part of the state, but depending on whether the other side hires a lawyer for the court, like in the case with Kirsten, the Superior Court of Orange County hired this lawyer named Sarah Overton to defend, whereas when I sued for Shelley Ellison up in the Northern District, the Deputy Attorney General, good old Kamala Harris, boy, do I have an axe to grind with her. But anyway, in that case, a Deputy Attorney General defends against this outrageous case of sexual molestation of 2 little girls for the state of California in the court. And what I'm alleging, I'll talk about VAWA funds, and what I'm familiar with are the VAWA funds. I can't think of the name of the statute for child abuse, and 504 of the rehab amendments, and Title II of the American Disabilities prohibits gender discrimination, abuse against the abuse against children also prohibits gender discrimination, and 504 and the ADA prohibit disability discrimination. Now, in the case of Ethan, what I'm alleging is that the untrained, misogynistic, hostile minors counsel who was unqualified, didn't do his job, never got the documents, completely colluded with the father, cut the mother out entirely, engaged in disability discrimination against Ethan and against his mother as a victim of domestic violence based on her gender. VAWA, now here's something interesting. There's a statute that was specifically enacted, and it became effective October 2013, and it's a part of the VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. And what it says is that you cannot discriminate, and it names all kinds of grounds, including gender. And I believe it was men who were bitching that they were being discriminated against, so they got their wish, and now I get to use it. It's all these damn men in the courts. But whoever, I mean, it may have been a bad motive, but the right outcome. So I'm using that statute and establishing, you establish that they're recipients of federal funding. They're all three of them are recipients of federal funding, and on that basis, the standard is also pretty low. It's lower than invidious gender discrimination, that they acted with a reckless and deliberate disregard for the rights of Ethan on the basis of his disability and on the basis of his mother's gender and status as a domestic violence victim. Now the judge said, oh, I couldn't really follow your arguments and everything, so I got to clean up my complaint. He's letting me amend. But what I'm saying is that without his mother having access to him, because she was not just the good parent, but she was also his mental health advocate since he was a little boy. She was the one who took the classes on how do you deal with this sometimes out of control little boy. And the records show she enrolled the kids at St. Edward's School, a block around the corner from my mother's house, by the way, in Dana Point. And for the 2 years she had him, raising him alone with the other two children, or Ethan's siblings, he was an altar boy, he was in soccer, he was doing great, there weren't any teacher complaints. He goes into the custody of his father, 26 police reports. He was hustling drugs, he was homeless. They went one time to the father's house, just a little boy's, but at the time, it was about the time he got the custody. I think the boy was 13, he had him pinned down on the ground. Cops didn't do anything because it was an middle class white male who made a lot of money at Wells Fargo and living in Laguna Beach Hills. So they always favored everything for the father and not for that boy. And that boy ended up dead. That's how bad, well, I'm preaching to the converted here. That's how bad it is in the system. And I'm looking at Judge Horner, and she has this. She pretends like she hasn't read it. And I said, how can you give any credence to this man that's sitting next to me, when he may have been directly involved? I'm not talking about his drunkenness, his alcoholism, beating. I'm saying, I think he had something to do with his actual death. And she just sits there like a stone wall. And I'm ready to say to her, hey, sister, you've chosen the patriarchy and you're going to be exposed. You need to come to our side. And it's not our side, it's the law and the facts side. Because the worst that you can lose is that they remove you as a judge, and you can join my law firm and become a fighter on the right side. And this is not a question of saying that we're trying to establish a matriarchy in place of a patriarchy. We're trying to say, as Cindy is saying, get rid of the gender bias and apply the law and the facts. But when you say that and you're female, you lose your bar card like Nanine McCool did in Louisiana. She joined the campaign, the social media campaign with her client who had alleged sexual abuse, simply saying, would you send a letter, a telephone call, an email, whatever, to Judge so-and-so, just asking him or her to apply the law and the facts. Louisiana State Bar disbarred her. She filed a petition for writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the sisters on that bench, who call themselves feminists, didn't even get another guy to vote with them to consider her petition. They upheld her disbarment. That is shameful. It's shameful on Kagan. It's shameful on Bader Ginsburg, who knows better, and it's shameful on Sotomayor, because at least Sotomayor and Bader Ginsburg call themselves feminists. No, you ain't. No, you ain't. Not when you allowed that brave Nanine McCool, to be disbarred, and her client to lose her child because she alleged sexual abuse. And that's the kind of thing that's going on. But anyway, Kathy, I hope I answered your question, that you proved the discrimination, that they had a reckless disregard for the rights.
And you're suing on behalf of the mother
No, yes, no, I'm suing for wrongful death.
from the mom? Because he's-
Yes, but I'm suing also for causes of action for the estate of Ethan. It's a little, I have to keep it straight.
Okay.
But basically saying that if he were alive, he could bring these claims himself. And even if, you know, the causation wouldn't be there for the wrongful death, it would be for allowing him to remain in that abusive home. Because he had those available at the time he died. The statute of 2 years for civil rights violations under the Constitution hadn't run, and then it's 3 years for disability discrimination hadn't run. But anyway, it's fascinating. I'm having a heck of a time. It's an uphill battle. One other thing on the state of California, the U.S. Department of Justice on VAWA, on the anti-discrimination, says in this question and answer memo that the states have an affirmative obligation that when they pass out this money under VAWA, the sub-recipients like court and county do not discriminate on any basis, including gender. Ain't happening. Kamala Harris could give a hoot. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Ina,
Ina.
I am from Ohio. I have a question. Can you practice in Ohio? I need the best lawyer in Ohio.
Well, what happens is it's this arcane language. They still use Latin language, so then you can ask for $400 an hour. But anyway, it's called pro hoc vice, for this time. And it means that a lawyer, you would retain a lawyer in Ohio, and that lawyer would ask to have me admitted for that particular case. And now I will say this, I don't know if Cindy remembers, he used, not Goldstein, but there was another really good lawyer,
Alan Rosenfeld.
is it Rosenfeld? Well,
Alan
that's my
Rosenfeld
ex-brother-in-law.
in Colorado.
Well, he was the one that would go all over the states and defend women on,
Richard Ducote and Alan Rosenfeld. Mostly Richard went all over.
well, this was defense of necessity, where the mother would take off, they would hire this guy, and he was getting all these acquittals. And the judges, well, anyway, I can't
I don't
remember, but I think it was Rosenfeld. But anyway, I did a case, I'll just tell you, I did a case where the mom took off with the boy because he was being seriously abused by the father. And the FBI actually wasted their money and picked her up either in New York or France. She had French relatives, and she'd gotten her, what? Anyway, they picked her up either on the other side of the American continent or in France, and brought her back for prosecution in San Luis. And I hung the jury 7 for acquittal, 5 were for her guilt. You know what the judge kept out? He granted the defense of necessity defense, but he kept out that when the boy was returned to his father, the boy ended up with a spiral fracture of his arm, and that is a prima facie case of child abuse. I had a guy, I had a referral to a radiologist in LA who was at that time, this was back in the 80s, so when I was up in San Luis, who was routinely used by the DA's office to analyze children who have either been abused or primarily had died, to see if the body showed marks of child abuse. And he said, that's a straight up case of child abuse, a spiral fracture. How does a kid end up with a spiral fracture of an arm? And the judge would not allow it in. And what was even more disgusting, it was a female prosecutor who came from a nursing background. She knew full well that that would have sealed the deal. And I had another thing to share with you is, I find that men are very sympathetic to these issues. They're not threatened, oh, you're just some female Nazi or something like that. They're not threatened by it, because if you get, well, you have to voir dire. You don't want sadists on the, and you don't want psychos, and you just have to have good, oh God, this guy's bad news. Right. Some sociopath that could lead the jury to a verdict against you. In that case, the guy was a drunk driver and they allowed that evidence in, the father that was abusing the child. And I was running out of strikes, you know, where you can get the juror off. So this guy that I voir dired had one or two drunk driving convictions. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to be so much against us because, you know, I went on a rampage about this guy driving drunk. He was our strongest supporter in the deliberation room. He said that guy was awful. And I said, you weren't bothered by the fact that you had a DUI and he had a DUI? And he said, absolutely not. He said, what he had done to that child was outrageous. I was totally for guilt. So you just never know. And I just recently did a case of domestic violence under our Code of Civil Procedure 1708.6, which gives the right of damages to the victim. And it has a huge, wonderful statute of limitations where the mother, as long as she files within 3 years of the last act of domestic violence, she can go back 12 years. She can go back as long as the domestic violence went on. Well, my client she did not realize what a bad situation she was in until she finally broke up with the guy and started taking classes on the cycles of violence. She said, oh my God, I was a battered woman. And she got beat up bad. But there were hiatuses of 2 years, and I was allowed to go all the way back in time because I showed the judge the case law on the interpretation of the statute. I'm outing him, Antonio Ramirez, a very violent deputy sheriff of LA County. My verdict was 5 men, 3 women, unanimous. January 14, $185,000. Yeah. So I'm saying, and I told him, I said, you're not just speaking to vindicate my client, you're speaking for the community, that you don't want domestic violence, that this has to be eradicated. And they agreed with me. And the greatest tribute that those men and women on the jury did for Elizabeth, the victim, was they selected a victim of domestic violence that the other side forgot to get off. So, but she became the foreperson. So it was a great day in the courtroom. So my goal is to get these cases, if at all possible, of abuse in front of a jury, which segues into the reason.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you to talk about that.
Raison d'etre for this organization. I keep saying we got to get to a jury trial. And I'll tell you why, like Cindy and I were talking about this, you know, this shit is nothing but common sense. You're getting beat up. You bring in the doctor's reports. You bring in photos of your bruises. You point to that guy, QED, he's guilty. How much money do you need? You know, you have doctors, therapists testify. Oh no, not in family law. Well, it could be like this Judge Horner. Well, it could be this and it could be that. And you're going, you know, and your head's spinning. So that's why this is one giant revolutionary step that the CJA, California Judges Association, will fight us almost to, God forbid, goddess forbid, to the death. Because it will take all this power from them to do what they want to do as they laugh at us as we fight. You know, I'll fight for my clients. And, you know, they just humor you along. For example, she said, when I said, you have a duty to protect victims of domestic violence. And I said, I saw how you handled this other victim of domestic violence. And she went out, she got off the bench and she said, I'm just thinking about finding you in contempt. So she called up everybody and they said, don't make a mark. I'm sure they said something like, you can't afford to do this. You'll make the newspaper, you know, whatever. So she came back all cozy and then I apologized to clear the air. But what she's doing is she's doing simulated due process because she wants to give a restraining order to my client to hurt her, to keep her from getting her license as a credentialed teacher, because after all, Alan Cook and the State Department, the great State Department, there's CJ, another nightmare, not her, but her case.
So can you speak to how our system would make that different, the one that we're
Okay,
creating?
yes. And
Real
this
quickly,
is,
because we only have a few
we
minutes.
have got to brainstorm, and you need to bring, I think Cindy would agree with this, we need, see, mothers have to be involved because every mother's gonna have a hook. This is what happened, how can, this will happen in this case, or this happened in this case. And we also need lawyers because we gotta put our brains together. But I told Cindy, we've got to have jury trials. And then we have to figure out, how we can make it safe, because what's gonna happen is that these family law judges will just go over there and nullify everything. And I know two things that come to our mind, and this is just technical stuff because I do civil litigation, but there's a thing called like motion for judgment on the pleadings, where you take the complaint and the answer, and then generally, in my civil rights cases, give judgment to the defendant. No, you ain't gonna do that. The other one is this thing called motion for summary judgment, where, we can just decide this on the paper. No, because then it gives discretion back to the judge, and they'll promptly nullify your right of jury trial. But like Cindy says, if you can get a jury trial, I think the Seventh Amendment says for what, $5 or more or something like that? Oh, 200 now?
Well, it was $20 back then, and now it's $200 in our day, in our money.
And okay,
So
so if you can get a jury trial for $200, I mean,
no, it's if it's worth $200.
that's in controversy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I mean.
Okay.
Then certainly we should have a right of jury trial on the most important thing, our kids. And just real fast, and I'll definitely take your questions and answers, because we have to brainstorm to try and make this, what's that expression, as airtight as, so they can't break it. And I know one of the things we've got to do is create, so we don't, because if we discriminate against people because they were former family law judges, we'll have a big lawsuit saying we're picking on them, we're being denied equal protection. So what we have to do is create position descriptions that are neutral, that at least to try and get rid of these horrible people that run the system now. And that would be, like Cindy didn't think the qualifications counted that much, but I think if you have people coming, social workers are awful to be.
May I have your attention, please?
It's
The
just a
library will
warning.
be closing in 30
We
minutes.
can continue.
The second floor restrooms will be closing in 15 minutes. If you need a library card, please go to the customer service desk immediately. Once again, the library will be closing in 30 minutes at 5:30 p.m. Thank you.
I still think, and I don't know, we could have a difference of opinion, but I still think that schools of social work at the colleges, child psychology are very, very progressive. It's only when they go to work. Well, they're not going to let the kid and their good job, they're not going to let a kid destroy their good job, and that's why they begin selling out and become very corrupt. And I think I think the people in the system, most of them are followers. If you demand accountability and so on, and demand these qualifications, and then you move in with a new preamble of what this new court system stands for, it could be just a very simple, some interesting name that is forward sounding, is revolutionary sounding, where we have to let go of the past. If we don't let go of the past, we're never going to move forward. And one of them is we just have to get rid of those judges. And I think one of the things is that we impose these kinds of qualifications, which will eliminate most of those people, I guarantee you. And then, then you have to build in wording of the statutes that will be pretty hard for anybody that's given any kind of control of the court to nullify, which is what is going on routinely. They've absolutely nullified all of the progressive legislation that our California legislature continues to, it turns out all the time, yeah, we'll get this passed. It doesn't mean anything, they nullify it, so it's hopeless. Anyway, so Tracy, is it?
No, Sarah. So
Sarah.
why isn't Kamala Harris doing more than what when you said you had?
Yeah, okay. Here's my fantasized banner if anybody wants to get out and pick it with us. Think Kamala Harris is for gun control. Oh, let's think again. Let's take the Fotinos case up in San Mateo. I represented Michelle Fotinos. married to a very extremely violent man, psycho, convicted felon of grand theft auto. Okay, so we're in family court. She'd been fighting for 7 years to get her 2 children back. He was very abusive with them. We got a wonderful judge named Frankie. Last name is Frankie. And he was fantastic. He was going after that guy righteously. Referred him for perjury prosecution. And they did arrest him, but they eventually threw the case. Okay, so then Rachel, her oldest daughter, walked in December of 2011 after they got Frankie off the case. We didn't have him anymore because we had, if she had walked just 6 weeks before they got Frankie off the case, he would have given sole physical custody to my client, referred the man for felony child abuse, and with a walking order of child support. So what happened was he got off the case. We had to fight for a whole year to get a restraining order for Rachel, very reluctantly, not her mother. They kept Austin. They would not arrest him. He had a bunch of guns. Rachel said he's going to kill us. Rachel was absolutely freaking out. She was 15 at the time. So my client and I went up and picketed in June 2012 in front of the state office building on McAllister Street in San Francisco. It was a hoot because I said, oh, we're going to have all this support. And it was a little windy. And we had this ragtag banner that was done in crayon. And we passed out the flyers. But on the flyer, I outed the judges. And I said, here's what you can do. Start calling the judges. 6 days later, they got a warrant for this guy, picked him up with 14 guns, 2 assault rifles, 20 high-capacity magazines, 10,000 rounds of live ammunition. They made my client and me a vexatious litigant. They took all the money away from her, refused to remove custody. They're in hiding and far away from San Mateo. They're terrified, and he walks free. Kamala Harris, I begged in a federal pleading, get down there, take over the federal prosecution. Take over the prosecution. They're going to throw the case. They did. The man walks free. He's a threat. He writes a state bar and says on me, I'm going to call you every 2 hours until you get rid of the bitch. He called my client horrible names, and none of the judges are doing anything. And they're living at the poverty level. Rachel still has horrible flashbacks. But the most important thing is these judges are willing, and Kamala Harris, to risk the lives of the Bay Area residents. This guy's a walking time bomb. He admits, or he brags about having 10 concussions. He is violent. They did everything to get rid of him at the Newark Fire Department in San Mateo County, and they let him out on disability. He's living off disability. He gets like $50,000, $60,000 a year. He's probably, between him and his wife, making over $100,000. He's taking my client's disability payment for his boy. He doesn't pay spousal support. He owes $24,000, and he owes Rachel for 1 year of child support. And he has them in very great fear. No, she doesn't support gun control. She's afraid to go down to San Mateo and tell Judge Robert Foyles, I'm sorry, I'm taking over. Okay? He has violated probations. And they don't care. But what I'm saying is, there's one thing, okay, to go after Rachel and Michelle. That's why they're in hiding. There's another to put the entire Bay Area residents in danger of suffering a gun massacre because his wife has a bunch of guns, and she's a Stepford wife. Her name is Dawn Grover, and she'll do anything the guy tells her. I believe he's stockpiling more guns, and he can go off at any time. He has now 3 felony convictions. The perjury, but they threw the case, and he was only convicted of 1 weapon, and he's never served a day in jail. It's scary. Okay, specifically, is she against corrupt prosecutors? Wrong. Does she care about domestic violence? No. Okay, does anybody know about the Scott DeCray case down in Orange County? Scott DeCray committed that massacre because he had to share 50-50 custody. He murdered his wife and 7 other people. He said, I did it because I didn't want to share custody. And he had a very good public defender who doesn't want him to suffer the death penalty. And this public defender suffering a lot of retaliation because he showed the corruption of Rackauckus and the sheriff. Thomas Getzel, the judge, recused the entire office and said to Camilla, "You're to take over the prosecution." The domestic violence victim, her survivors, and the survivors of the 7 other people begged her to go through with the trial. They want closure. Okay, whether he gets the death penalty or not, they want it over and done with. No, I've got to defend Rackauckus, one of the most corrupt prosecutors in the United States, such that the New York Times on the East Coast demanded that the FBI go and investigate him. So she's fighting for Rackauckus and the 4th appellate, delaying a trial that involves terrible, terrible suffering of the survivors of this horrible massacre because a man didn't want to share custody. That's her record on domestic violence. That's her record on domestic violence with respect to Michelle Futinos and Rachel. That's her record on gun control with respect to John Futinos. That guy walks free. She also fought like crazy on People versus Baca, and the Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit said, it went viral. You can watch the oral argument. Flat out said to the Deputy Attorney General defending the People versus Baca, it was a Riverside prosecutor, and it was overturning a murder conviction, where it's a little problematic, I guess, whether the guy did it. But the point is, everybody acknowledged the horrible corruption of the Riverside prosecutor, and she was defending him. So the Court of Appeals, Wardlaw and Kuczynski and Fletcher said, you know, if I rule, it's going to be against you and it won't look pretty. So she reluctantly said, go ahead, grant the habeas so he can go back for a retrial. She also doesn't care about racist prosecutors. Steve Wagstaff is a racist prosecutor of San Mateo. Alfred Giannini is a racist prosecutor from San Mateo, hired by James Fox, a former 28-year San Mateo prosecutor, works for the state bar trying to get me disbarred. Hired Alfred Giannini, racist. James Fox is race. She doesn't care. She hasn't done anything. I want her gone. Okay? If you can't protect victims of domestic violence, if you can't fight against racist prosecutors, and you're maintaining, then you're part of the problem. You are supporting the patriarchy. You are supporting corruption. And that's why I want to work to get Lopez elected, and she may have a good chance if we can expose the corruption of Kamala Harris. Anyway, that's why I don't like her.
If we do go to jury trials, will these women be afforded public defenders like in criminal trials? Because right now it's pro per, we're kind of thrown to the wolves. We don't know how to navigate the system, and we're pretty much slaughtered in the system as it is. And the other thing is, how are we going to go about making these changes that you're talking about?
Well, first of all, okay, the first question is getting slaughtered. You don't know how to navigate your way. Cindy and I talked about that. And the worst possible thing that faces us in trying to bring change are the court appointments. The judges are allowed to control the purse strings of minors counsel, children's minors counsel, parents counsel, public conflict counsel. When the public defender says I'm declaring a conflict, they get to do the appointment. And what happens is the judge, because the judge, then the system of representation is controlled by the judges. And I was telling Cindy, we can't have that. So I was saying, well, how do you handle it for people that don't have the money to hire an attorney? And if you do a jury trial, you would want that, okay? And I was thinking of regional branches of a newly created organization where the judges have absolutely no right to do any court appointment across the board, whether it's criminal, civil, family, this new court that we envision, and so on. And it would be tax supported, and it would be based on, you put in your income and expense declaration, and you might be required to pay something, but based on your income, sliding income scale. But even the state would have absolutely no control over the attorney-client relationship, except insofar as, other than me, who's always in trouble at the bar, I'm different. No, whatever. No, you want to get somebody who is not going to be disbarred, is an honest, ethical attorney, And they would have to do due diligence in terms of getting the lawyers on the list. They'd have to have malpractice insurance, that kind of thing. But that's what I envision. But again, it has to, I think, have to be revolutionary. And if you keep allowing judges all this control, it ain't gonna happen. And so that I think would be the beginning, because parents often don't have the money in juvenile court, but look at the representation they get. It's hideous.
So many mothers that are pro per, they just can't afford lawyers.
Yeah, as a stopgap measure, what I was dreaming about, if I could just, had some access to nonprofit funds or something, is to set up, and it can be done, because there really are some decent lawyers out there. They may not put themselves out like I do, but they are concerned about this, of what's going on with mothers and children being treated so badly, that we could set up, like a spider, or, and there, for example, I could set this up right now, because I think my office would allow it, where I could reserve this big room, like maybe on a monthly basis or bi-weekly, and go, have everybody sign. I can't give you legal advice, but here, this is how you do it, like a real self-help clinic. The other possibility is to train mothers like yourselves in kind of a paralegal way, and see if we could see about some kind of licensing where your practice is restricted in only, again, I'm just throwing this out. This is just brainstorming in part. Like, you would only be able to represent mothers who are alleging domestic violence or alleging child abuse, and it would be so it would be a non-attorney, so you're not paying a whole lot of money, but then they would get trained by a lawyer like me. That's another possibility. Because
may I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 15 minutes. The second floor restrooms are now closed. Once again, the library will be closing in 15 minutes, and the second floor restrooms are now closed. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's give a big thanks to Pat.
I just put in the saying, it ain't gonna be me. I'm just a lawyer. And, I've got my finger, it's a Band-Aid surgery that I'm doing. It's gotta be the elimination of systemic racism and sexism. It's got to end. It's you mothers. And you can do it. Black Lives Matter, we need to align ourselves. There were women who founded that organization, and just remember, they're mothers who have lost their sons executed by the police on the street. So they would have a stake in what we're trying to do, because they're mothers also. Okay, thanks.
Well, I just want to say too that we're in the very beginning stages of this new system that Pat and I are talking about. So the questions that you have will be answered eventually, but really we have to have a lot of think tank sessions figuring it out. And like I was saying before, we welcome input. So just if you have ideas on it, we will be having meetings. I'm wanting to have Women's Coalition meetings every month, and we can do it. I don't have enough money to rent this room all the time, but we can do it possibly over Google Hangouts on air, that sort of thing. There's actually a question answer thing on Google Hangouts on air. But anyway, we'll work on that for any of you who want to be regulars and be part of this and come to the meetings. Let me know for sure that you want to. I think it's going to be like a kind of a snowball thing where we start small and we're going to gain and we're going to gain and we're going to gain, and pretty soon I really think it's going to be huge. I mean, we have in the thousands now, we're going to have in the 100,000s hopefully pretty soon, and then I'm really hoping we get millions, and that we get all women on board. Like I said, this is not just protective mothers, it's not just mothers, it's women, and we're presenting ourselves as women and rights as women. So thank you for coming today. I appreciate you taking time out of your Saturday to come and support this important movement. And I'm sorry for any of you who are still in the throes of your case. I feel horrible. Hang in there, stay strong, and remember to channel your outrage into activism, all right? There's a registration form. If everybody hasn't filled it out, you can fill it out on the way out. And thank you again.